I'm looking pretty rough. I got up at 11:30 last night. It's 6:13 a.m. I've been working this whole time. About to go take a break to lift weights, but got a thought on my mind while the pre-workout kicks in. Uh, we, you know, every one definition you could provide for character is that which distinguishes one person from another. Um, I like that definition for now. Um, just like people, different religious traditions, they have a set of differences, and maybe some substantial part of those differences uh, is comprised of the sacred cows they have, the non-negotiable dogmas that they believe. Dogma, I guess, is that one of those words that are the same when they're plural? I don't know. Anyway, these dogmatic assertions that they have, and in at least some religious traditions, one of those is an outright obsession with family relationships, particularly marriage. And it's very important to move past those ideas. Jesus was very plain in saying that in the end times, there would be great division because of differences in how fully people recognize and receive his truth. He explicitly mentioned that family relationships would be severed. This is where he was talking about coming with a sword. He said, "You think I'm coming to bring peace, but I'm coming with a sword." Now, it's funny because this is... I don't mean to make light of this, but because it's not at all a light thing, but I do find Jesus' way of teaching, I find it to be funny sometimes, because so often he would say that he's not teaching a certain thing when he was absolutely teaching that thing, but he was drawing attention to a preliminary understanding, meaning you need to understand why it's good to seek God for bread. When you say any good father, if their child wants bread, does he give them a stone? That whole thing, he was actually the higher meaning was drawing attention to the second thing, not the first thing. But to get to the second thing, you have to come through the first thing. And so you need to seek God for what you want before you can learn the wisdom of what he wants, which is going to be different than what you want. Okay? It's that idea. So he said, I don't come to bring peace, but a sword. He does come to bring peace, right? It's all over the scriptures. But it's preceded by the sword. The sword brings the peace. And it's not through war. It's through disentangling things that we erroneously consider to be homogeneous. A priest cuts things. They make a difference. They make a difference between the sacred and the profane, the valuable and the less valuable, good and evil, and all that jazz. So, in families, see, people regard them as sacrosanct by virtue of who knows what. A good father sacrifices everything for his family. A woman risks her life for her children. And hopefully she gives her life once they're here for their benefit, dedicates her life. So how can I say that these things are not as valuable as we think they are? Well, I'm not disputing that set of value, and it's tremendous. It's great. What I'm saying is that alone does not translate to heaven in the way you think. Those sacrifices, how are those different than any sacrifice you can make for anyone else? So is a woman carrying a baby for 9 months and then risking her life having birth, is that different than her dedicating herself consummately to anything else for 9 months? There are things that can absorb you 24/7, even physically, that have nothing to do with bearing a child. There are many things you can do to risk your life for the benefit of another person. So what's different? You see, a tremendous portion of that value that a mother has for her children is actually chemical. And this is sad. It's an example. So like words, there are many, many, many experiences in life, you could say all of them, that can draw us up higher or keep us down lower, depending on how we interpret them and what we do with it. When a woman has a baby for the first time, especially if she does so naturally, vaginally, and breastfeeds, there are strong chemical processes that evoke emotions that are deeper than anything she's ever felt. The meaning she will feel in that will squish everything else down to nothing, no matter how intense it seemed at the time. That is a wonderful thing because it corrects the graph of value in her life, changes the scale, makes it more accurate. It can call a woman to something greater, or if she takes that and limits it to the chemical process, it will also halt that progress at that limit. It's not quite the same, but you could go through the same thing with fathers and husbands, because a man's sacrifice begins at marriage. The significant sacrifice for a woman doesn't begin until she has a kid. A lot of people are going to get ruffled by that, but if you want to, we can have a debate on that. Bring it. So the question is, and this is critical, of your notions of value in a family, how much of that comes through your biological associations? And how much of that comes through charity? Because anything that comes through charity is actually available with anyone else. You get that? It's a huge point. So there's an aspect of value in families that comes from the biological side of things. Most of that is an invitation to come up to the spiritual side of things. The spiritual side of things is available with everyone. That being said, there are situations of value that can only exist in families. Okay, so don't get me wrong there. But let's save that topic for a different day. Suffice it to say, anything a man can impart to another man can be imparted even if that other man is not his biological son. The greatest gift a man can give to a woman can only happen through marriage. The greatest gift that women can impart to men or women can only happen through motherhood. Okay, so I think we checked all those boxes good enough for now. Let me tell you something that's very important. As this sword comes and it chops through these things, as we progress towards what comes after, I'm going to tell you, there are going to be a lot of single men and single women in Zion. A lot. Why single men? Okay, so let's do like the Venn diagram. Why both? Because a lot of people are going to die. That's reason number one. A lot of people are going to die. Disproportionately, men will die more frequently than women. Okay, so why will there be tons of single women? Because you read Isaiah in the beginning, it's like, oh, well, what about polygamy? There's only... People act like polygamy is like the Wild West, and I'm talking about God's version of this, not some Yahoo's opinion. it's not anything goes at all. It's a much stricter relationship, if anything. It has to be of a higher caliber than monogamy in order to be okay in God's eyes. What do I mean by that? There's a nice scripture in the Old Testament, and basically what it says is the benefits to the wife cannot diminish the first wife. So let's say the first woman, because I want to make clear, I'm not talking about legal relationships here. I personally believe that the Lord does not have a positive opinion of the government being involved in marriage whatsoever. And because of the way the laws work, we probably need a new vocabulary for this to indicate that we're talking about very different things. But anyway. So what caliber of a man would you have to be even today, when we're still drowning in prosperity, in order to have a relationship with two women in which the first woman is not diminished in any way by the fact that there's a second woman? And so this precludes almost 100% of any situations, right? Any possible situations there. Well, when Zion first kicks off, everyone will be absolutely destitute. I mean, absolutely. I don't think people get that, okay? But it's going to be the case. So, excuse me. I just ate a coconut thing and I'm choking. Coconut. Hold on. I always regret the coconut. It's just so dang good. So, how is any guy in destitution going to provide for more than one lady? So these folks that have this daydream of, well, whatever happens, I'm going to waltz into Zion as a lady. Hopefully they are ladies to begin with. But ladies, don't think you're going to waltz into Zion and just choose from what's there, right? Because that man is going to have to optimize the available opportunities to maximize the benefit, and he will not have infinite resources. So believe it or not, that's going to be the case. A lot of guys are going to say, I'm sorry, there's nothing I could really do. So there's that. So what about specific to men? Well, and by the way, so if you're a lady and you have a bunch of kids and they manage to survive, or some of them, and you waltz in, it's going to put you lower on the list, because there's just less he can do for you than he can a young lady who's not married yet, who's never been married yet, who's still young. She's got her whole life ahead of her, and all of her kids will be starting from square one. They won't be rooted in whatever diminished set of ideas and culture that yours grew up with. And so that's just the facts. This is some brutal stuff, but I guess it's better to know it sooner and wrap your head around it. What about the guys? Well, so beyond the people whose spouses are killed, who might be interested in another one, and I think those guys, for the most part, are going to be the ones picking up the ladies with kids. So that's nice for both of them. But I'm just throwing tons of little branches on the fire here, giving you plenty to get upset at. There are going to be a lot of eunuchs in Zion. Eunuchs. So you should look that up in the Old Testament. In ancient times, it wasn't so weird for men to voluntarily choose not just celibacy, but to take themselves out of the game by physically basically mutilating themselves. In there's a variety of ways. They're all quite gruesome. to basically say, hey, I'm not interested. I'm taking the chips off the board, so to speak. Why would anyone do that? This is a really difficult thing, I think, for people to hear. But the fact is that guys, even now with reduced testosterone, guys have sexual desire. And it's a powerful thing. And so back in the day when a guy would get married real young, it was a viable thing to hold off until marriage. That was something that was seen as not so difficult to do. Nowadays, it's seen as something really difficult. I mean, if you go to age 35 as a male virgin, I should say in a broader sense, but I don't know what we could call this, as someone who's never been involved in any kind of sexual activity, including by yourself. That's like unheard of, right? And one of the reasons is that you would have to devote an enormous amount of resources to controlling yourself over that entire time. And meanwhile, like, you need to go make some money, you need to improve yourself, you need to be in your game. And that's a really tricky thing to do. It becomes a lot easier as you get older. But I mean, most men, they really struggle with this, apparently, judging by statistics. So, like, I read Gandhi's autobiography recently. I didn't realize he was a huge fan of celibacy. I'm not sure if it was generally, but for him, he felt like that was something he needed to do, and he was married. And he said it took him till he was in his 50s to figure that out, which I thought was nuts. At that point, no pun intended, at that point, you know, your testosterone's waning enough that it's massively easier than it has been prior. And it's funny because he kind of bragged about this, but I don't see what the big achievement was there. But anyway, if he was 20, it would have been more impressive. And that's something that there are people out there that manage to do, right, at a young age. Anyway, so guys are just going to take themselves out of the game. They're going to look around and say, you know, this just isn't worth it. The traps out there for guys getting married and the decline in the quality of women, I'm just not playing this game. And so they'll come into Zion as eunuchs. And that's something that you've probably never heard, right? But it's in the scriptures. I could show you prophecies of Zion that talk about eunuchs. So, and people are like, oh, this is figurative. This must mean some weird thing. No, it's literally, that's just saying, it's just describing how it's going to be. And, you know, you want to talk about weirdness. Imagine being in a place culturally where, I don't mean a literal place like Zion, but I mean right now, here and now, moving towards this, where that was on the menu of options for guys, that was something you could do that would be as socially acceptable as, I don't know, something so benign as deciding you're a woman, right? Because that's no big deal. But taking yourself out of the game by making yourself a eunuch, that you're an absolute crazy person, right? Anyway. So as far as families becoming or being sacrosanct, here's what it really comes down to. There are a lot of people out there that put their trust in something other than God. And the go-to for this is to make the other thing seem like God. And so if they can camouflage it, maybe they can get away with it, right? So what other things do you put your trust in that are not God, but you can pretend like they are? What about when a man makes promises to you, and he says that it's in the name of the Lord, and you put your trust in that? Well, how would you know if it was actually from the Lord? Here's a great secret. God's promises come in similitude to God. So this isn't the best example. Oh, here's a better one. Okay. So when Abraham received promises from God, on one occasion, it co-occurred with him sacrificing Isaac. Now, why would the Lord ask Abraham to sacrifice his only begotten son? I should say child of promise. He had Ishmael, poor old Ishmael. So why did he ask Abraham to sacrifice his child of promise? Well, because this was absolutely in similitude of the sacrifice of the son for the father, right? So God's promises, they co-occur with things and people that are like God. And so your security with God, if it's based on something that some dude said, then, and nothing else, no changes in you where you're becoming more like God, then those promises aren't worth the words they contain, right? At best, they're just an invitation to obtain the real thing. So, for example, someone who has devoted their lives to the Lord and been faithful to him at every hazard, against every opposition, they don't need anyone to tell them what their standing is before the Lord. And no matter what anyone else says or does to them, or doesn't do or say, it won't affect their confidence in God. Why? Because they know the price that they've paid, and they know that they've been loyal to the Lord under every circumstance. So what is their promise? Where does it come from? Well, it's an attitude of life. Their every decision is the contract. Okay, so let's go into some more examples. What if your idea of security comes from some notion of what you would call scripture? Okay, well, so a lot of times people make a comparison of what's in scripture and what's outside of it. And so if someone just says some random idea, you're like, if it was important, it'd be in the scriptures. And then if someone, I don't know, says maybe your interpretation of the scripture is not so great, and think about it this way, you say, no, it can't be that way, because this is always how I've understood it. Is the authority its inclusion in a book? Or is the authority how true it is? Because you can misinterpret words in a book, but the true principles are true. And so if your interpretation lines up with the truthfulness, you're good. If that's the source of the authority, then it really doesn't matter where it is, does it? People get real hung up on things like the Apocrypha, or even, is the Book of Mormon scripture or not? We could talk about like the Gita or any of these other books considered to be scripture by anybody. What matters is what it says and the value of that idea, because that's what determines what it comes from. It's not what book it came out of. There's no stamp that says any idea that anyone has while reading this book is absolutely 100% the most truthy thing that could ever be. It's absurd, right? But that's how we act. What about agreements between people? And this is relevant to the topic because when you get married, you make vows to each other, right? And many would say to God. Why do you think the Lord said, make your oaths yea, yea, and nay, nay? Well, it turns out that when you're totally plugged into God, your ideas about things change over time. And so it's really difficult to make promises that you can keep with anyone, because the only promise you can keep is with God, to say, I will always do what I sincerely believe benefits all people the most. That's the same as saying, I am taking upon myself the name of Christ, and I will witness of him at all times and in all places until I die. Those are the same agreement. So, because everything God does is for the benefit of all. So, there will be times when your allegiance to things, people, situations, whatever, has to change because it's revealed to you that the understanding you were operating under differs from the one you have now. So, this is one of those really dangerous, really uncomfortable situations that we have to contend with out of Scripture. So Moses sent his wife back to her father at one point. He said, okay, you got to go back to your father because you're interfering with what's going on here. And Abraham either sacrificed or was going to Isaac. There's some dispute about that. I don't think it actually matters either way, believe it or not. In the situations abound. Peter left his family when he followed Jesus. He left his family. So what were the arrangements made in all this? I don't know. I'm just saying I think we need to loosen our grip on our preconceived notions about how things are going to go. We certainly shouldn't think that we're going to waltz into Zion in an RV. It's not going to happen. An RV full of food and guns. It's not going to happen. Stuff before that might involve some people with that situation. I don't know. But I can tell you for sure, when stuff really kicks off, it's going to be full destitution. This is a super unpopular idea, but it's true. And maybe our closely held ideas about family are totally bonkers too. Now, I have to make a strong statement here. I am not condoning divorce in any way. I don't think people should abandon their kids. I've seen some people do this for really crazy reasons, and I think it's really obvious that what they were doing is a terrible thing, or what they wanted to do in some cases. I think parents have a until death responsibility for their children, at least. And I think I have strong reasons to believe that God really doesn't like divorce. It's personally not on my list of things that I ever intend on doing. But I think that we need to realize that even if we don't do anything to initiate divisions in families, that people will respond to God's light by dividing, from separating themselves out of these things. Oh, here's a great example. Noah had grandkids, it says right there in Genesis, and they did not come onto the ark. He had granddaughters, it specifically says. And their parents, his sons, and their wives, their parents were on the ark. And so wrap your head around that. Those 8 people, they left Noah's grandkids or his kids' kids. So that's something to think about. You can't make your allegiance to your family primary because your allegiance needs to be to God. Now, in talking about confidence, right? People put confidence in their church. People put confidence in their understanding of a few scriptures. They put their confidence in legal agreements. They put their confidence in promises that religious people make to them. But out of all of those promises, what's stronger? The specific, what you consider to be example of a promise from God, or the basis of that promise, which is God. So all security is completely coupled to how God is, and your similitude to him, and your living of his word. That's if you read through D&C 132, it comes out real strong. Any sort of arrangement that's not based on the name of Christ, his will, his character, how he is. If it's not based on that, it's not going to endure. And you might counter that with, well, I don't accept the Doctrine and Covenants of Scripture, or I don't like 132 as Scripture. Okay, fine. But read through it and pull out those ideas and tell me if you have a case that suggests that any other agreement is as strong or enduring as something fully based on the character of God. And I don't think you could make that case, but it surprised me. I'll take that one any day. I would take an agreement based on the name of God over anything else, any day. And my point with this is, not only is that greater security than anything else you might have to let go of in order to live that way, but also any of those other things can only be made stronger by you subordinating them to the actual name of God. Does that make sense? I would rather be married to a woman whose whole dedication is to God than I would be married to a woman under any other situation where I had the strongest legal agreement in the world concerning our marriage. Does this make sense? So if I were a woman, flipping it around, if I were a woman, I would prize a man who said, look, I'm not going to marry you legally for the specific reason that I'm not making a pretense to something that's not true. My loyalty is to God, and I will treat you as I believe he would in my place across all situations, no holds barred. And if you don't believe that is stronger than anything else I could give, you're not a good person for me to dedicate my life to. So I would prefer that as a woman to anything else that I could find. And on and on and on. I'd rather my dad be a man who's like Jesus than my biological, then I would prefer him to be my biological father. So you can wrap your head around that one. I'd rather my mentor be more like Jesus than me than fit into my preconceived notions of what someone wiser than me might look like and sound like, be older than me, or any of these other things. So you can take this as far as you'd like. And I hope that these ideas haven't seemed like random ramblings. I hope something here is sticking to you and is something worth thinking about. Because we've covered a lot of what seem like maybe unrelated topics, but there's certainly themes weaving through this. Maybe one big takeaway from this is it's useful for us to really dig into what we think we believe and identify aspects of what we say is the gospel that actually encourage us in our lack of trust in God, complete trust in him. Because there are a lot of those, and we need to cut them out and throw them away and seek God for what can replace them that is better.